Welcome back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses, with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. And our guest this week is a COO entrepreneur named Joshua Monge. When you see his name, it's not spelled that way, but that's the pronunciation. And I'm super excited this week to talk to him about three problems that owners and founders find and see and how to resolve them. Joshua, I'm sure you can introduce yourself better than I did. Why don't you take it?
Thanks, man. So as you said, I work as a fractional COO, basically help businesses about $500,000 to $5 million revenue figure out how to get their business to run more efficiently. The analogy that I like to use is the bus is on fire and the wheels are coming off. I help CEO put the fires out, get the wheels back on the bus, and get it back on the road. Do that through process documentation and just kind of getting in the trenches with the CEO, figuring out where the bottlenecks are, do some process mapping, documentation, basically everything they need to do just to understand what's actually happening in their business and figure how to get things structured. So,
well, that's awesome. And it's interesting. A lot of people, when they think COO, the person behind the scenes, the operations guy, they're like, oh, that's not very exciting. But I'm here to tell you, in the area you described, 500,000 and up, that's when a business starts to be a real company. Below that, you can run it. And please, I'm not speaking ill of smaller companies. I've been there. I understand. But when you're below that, you can kind of run it like a club, 2 pizzas, a 12-pack of beer, and we work. But when you get bigger, you need those real systems and processes.
Well, yeah, because, when you're starting in the business yourself, you're responsible for every facet of it. So you're the guy that's having to sell, you're the guy that's having to fulfill, you're the guy that's having to do the follow-up in accounting and chase people down for money. And then all of a sudden you realize like, oh, wow, I need to start adding people. And then you add people. And then what you don't realize is there's a level of complexity that comes in the more people you add. And someone needs to help be mindful of that. And I think, people do it as it grows. They kind of start doing it naturally, like the frog that boils, right? Like he doesn't really know the temperature, but at some point he goes, man, it's getting pretty hot in here. That's kind of where that 500,000 mark is, wow, okay, things are starting to get hot. There's more people here. Like, wait, what's going on? And like, why am I working 1,000,000 hours? It's that changing point. So
100% yes. And it's interesting because complexity is the enemy of execution, especially in smaller orgs. And in a startup, the biggest advantage you have is nimbleness and ease of interaction. But again, there's a natural and necessary complexity that occurs as the organization grows. So what I typically tell people is iterate your systems and processes. In the very beginning, and this is going to sound like crazy talk, so you might want to put your earmuffs on. In the very, very beginning, I don't think there should be any. You're figuring out what works.
but you're fighting words, man.
I know. Thankfully, we're in different time zones because we're in the parking lot. But once you've got that figured out, you need to start to codify what works. And those are your initial systems and processes. And then as your organization grows, you need still more definition because that 3-person team becomes a 10-person team, becomes a 50-person team. You've got to iterate those systems and processes and add the necessary reporting and structure to make that work.
Okay, yes. Now that part, yes. Like, trying to come up with the perfect plan before you even set sail. I've seen businesses do that. People that are like stuck at SBDC level, like, they have a full-time job, they want to get into something, but they're busy writing this big, comprehensive marketing business plan, and they never put the
never going to look at after they turn the lights on.
Yeah. Because you throw the plank in the water, you start paddling out there, then you start realizing, oh, I actually need some of these components. So I could see that. I think a little pushback is having some basic operational components in place, though, or getting some of that, because I think what is it, like a stitch in time saves 9, right? If you know how you get some of the processes and some of the structure in place a little bit ahead of when you actually everything's on fire and you definitely need it. Try to do a little before it was good. So
let me throw some vocabulary at yours, and I love that there's pushback. This should be a conversation, not a sermon. So tangent and then vocabulary. So, in my opinion, every startup's founder should be the one to do the initial sales. And the
Yes.
reason is because nobody's going to be able to do it as well as they can.
Right.
And they need to figure out what language gets their prospect to client.
Right.
And once they've done that, they can build a basic system and process for their first salesperson and then ultimately their first sales team. And if they're not a salesperson themselves, they can also then create the structure whereby they can hire their sales leader. But the reason why I say, and maybe my words were too extreme, but the reason why I say no systems and processes is because and again, I'm using sales as an example. That founder doesn't know what those words are. That founder hopefully has an ICP in mind, but in my experience, rarely the right one initially.
Right.
So all of those things are going to change. And one quick vocabulary thing, then I'll happily give it back. Especially in the beginning, I'm a bigger fan of frameworks than systems and processes.
Okay.
By that, I mean a loose structure they're building around that's going to change and codify and harden, like wet mud to clay and clay to ceramic.
Okay, I think that, yes, but even then, there's still a framework, and I think the framework is some operational piece. Like, I'll give you an example, like checklist, right? So when you get on a sales call, make sure that you use the person's name, make sure you identify their pain point, make sure, having those kind of processes in place on a base level, I think could be helpful. Because when you're going to market and you're testing these things out, the best way to know that something needs to change or what to change, right, is to control the variables as much as you can and then basically test those out. So I'm not saying lock it down to this hardcore system, but, make sure that when you're doing your pitches, kind of get some consistent information that you're capturing each time. So then when you see like, hey, nobody's buying what I'm selling, is it because you don't have product market fit? Is it because you're talking to the wrong person? Like that way you can kind of diagnose it. So I don't think we disagree so much. When you said don't do I was like, no, we definitely need some operations, but I think we're probably in agreement. It's a framework or a looseness to it at the beginning.
I think your step two is my step one. So I mean, rather my step one is your step two, or my step two is your step one.
Yeah,
I think
which
so.
is fine. I mean, that's the thing, right? We have these priority differences. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying. I think I'm going to interview a CFO next and tell them that there's no financial problem that you can't sell your way out of, so I can kick
There you
the
go.
ant nest just like this.
Yeah.
But I think like as a founder and a salesperson, I would do that somewhat intuitively. But
Yeah.
in order to have the data, there's a bit of a chicken egg there. In order to have the data to do what you're describing, you're going to go, lead face first into a wall a few times. But anyways, here we are on a tangent.
One
I
of
think
many,
one thing
I guess.
yes, the first of many. But I think what I would take away from what we're saying is, in the beginning, things should be loose, and the
Yes.
lessons we learn and the data we gather empowers us as we grow to make educated decisions and create systems and processes that will continue to iterate for as long as we have a business.
Okay. Yes, fully agree.
So I just put my COO hat on to say those things. It hurt me inside, but I did it for you.
Hey, great. But I want to hear that episode where you say, hey, CFO, we don't need financial stuff at the beginning. Like, that's not important.
I've got a few CFO friends, and I will say this: it really is one of my weaknesses as a founder, because I do come from a sales background.
Yeah.
A part of me is convinced that there's no mistake I can make that will be big enough that we can't sell ourselves out of.
Right, because the idea then is like, listen, I bagged the big dinosaur here. It's like we have food, so eating is not the problem. But what do we do with all the mess and everything else?
How do we carve it up and preserve it? Yeah, 100%.
Right. Yeah. True sales. We're just bringing the revenue, and then everything else will work itself out.
Exactly. I put a giant elephant on your plate, Joshua. Make it into steaks for me.
There you go.
So let me say this, at risk of this being a 7-hour episode. So our first challenge that interviewees have on my show is being able to get to their point because I talk too much. But the first challenge that owners see What do you think that is, Joshua?
I think the first challenge that they get to is wearing too many hats. I think business grows. They're used to doing everything because they had to do everything, but they get to a place where it's not efficient. And I'm going to borrow a statement from Cody Sanchez. She says, if you don't have an administrative assistant, you are the administrative assistant.
Yes.
And so if you're a business owner and your bill rate is above, I don't know, let's just say $50 an hour, then any task that's a quarter of that or half of that, you really shouldn't do it. You should look at hiring somebody so you can stay focused at billing higher hours, or focused on the elements of the business that require a kind of a higher value view. So, so then the wearing too many hats, it starts because you had to wear all the hats, but then there's a point where you need to start passing those hats on, start hiring people, and start doling that out.
Yeah, I think what you just said is actually related to the tangent we just went on our journey with, because in the beginning, as the founder, you are the business, you are
Right.
the all things. What's the old saying? Chief cook and was it bottle washer or whatever? But
Oh yeah.
but but the challenge is in those transition points. And your example is great. If I bill myself at $100 an hour and I can get an admin at $35 an hour, then there's a $65 an hour delta that is obvious. But the hard thing for the owner is, having been in those places, and it been me, is that $35 an hour going to be done the way I would do it? So letting up that control.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's a no, yes there. No, it's not going to be the same way. Yes, it can be as good.
Yeah.
But the second part is belief in your sales funnel that you're going to be able to sustain that. I think that's another tripping point that owners get.
Yeah, it is. I think to your first point about nobody's going to do it the way I do it. Yeah, that's like, let's not pretend. You bring somebody else, they don't have the same passion, they don't have the same reason, they don't have all the history, they don't have all of those components. But there is a point though where the task just needs to get done. And if you, again, this is where operation starts right at the beginning. Is that, if you document the process and document how you do things, then when you get this person coming on board, you're like, by the way, when you start a client file, order it this way because this is the way we have everything structured. I think that's how you can ensure that someone can actually do it the way that you want to, is, having some documentation in place and having some structure there. And then, but to your other point, be okay with people doing it a little bit differently. I mean,
Yes.
I have an executive admin and she does things not the way I would do it. And I could spend 3 hours teaching her how I want it done, or I can be happy that it's 80% done and I just have to do a little bit of percentage to fix it. Like, I'm okay with that. So I've had to learn. So it's not natural. So I'll give you that.
Yeah, and you touched on a couple things that I think they're important to unpack. One of them is, in the beginning, ideation, pre-revenue, early revenue stages, overhead equals death. Everything you buy shortens your runway. So in the beginning, by necessity, you have to do everything. As that stops being the case, and this is one of the things I recommend, you as a founder or an owner go from being an asset to a liability because you become a bottleneck.
Right.
And somewhere just before that is when you want to make those transitions.
Yeah.
When you bring somebody on, though, to your final point, and I'll shut up and see the mic.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
When you bring somebody on, that's always a project. And generally
Right.
speaking, and this is a generality, the more money you have to pay them, less of your time it takes to train them, because
True.
you can get a more experienced person with more relevant experience. But even in the extreme of that, you still need to give them the time, because investing the time from the beginning to train them right will save you so much time later on to get that 80%.
So I think you can save some time in the lower you pay the person, the more you need to spend time with them. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you did spend some time getting things documented or getting things structured and saying, like, this is how we do it, when that person comes in, that's all they're going to know. They're going to know the
Yes.
reality that you're kind of set for them. So when you say, hey, listen, I'm bringing you in this position, here's your checklist of things you got to get done, and this is the way to do it, they're going to do that because they want to impress you. So I think spending some time ahead of hiring that person to
Yes.
prepare. Here we go. Prepare for that person might
Yes.
save you some of that learning curve of, okay, I just hired this person and I didn't write anything down. Now we're gonna have to figure it out as we go. Like, yeah, that's a complete mess, and I would definitely not recommend that. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm an advocate of active management. So my attitude is you prepare for the hire, you do an extensive orientation, and that person gets 100% of my attention until they show me through their execution that they understand.
yeah,
Once they show me through their execution that they understand, they earn their autonomy.
that makes
And
sense.
that's the way
Yeah,
that I work with folks. Now, keeping in mind, I almost never hire admins. I tend to hire software architects and more mid to senior level folks whose salaries start at 125, 150 and can go over 300K.
yeah,
So the necessity to keep them long term is critical. So
right.
understanding early on if we've got the right person is very, very important because it gets expensive very quickly. I don't want to get bogged down in this,
Yeah,
but I think that structure it blesses everybody involved because if that person sees that you care about their outcome, they tend
yeah,
to be more inclined to want to perform better. And if you create an environment where people feel heard and valued, where personal missions and values align with corporate mission and values, and they're
right.
consistently growing in their skills and responsibilities, then they have a vested interest in success with your firm and go long term.
So I think for upper management or for higher level positions, right, where they have more responsibility and authority, yeah, definitely. I definitely see that too on that end. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so I know we were talking about wearing too many hats. I think, you know, understanding when and where to hire those people, what you need them for. And I do want to circle back to one point you made. If you hire this person, then you're worried about cash flow. Great, keep selling them, right? Because I'm the best salesperson for my business. So then if I can shed myself of the admin tasks and have an admin take care of it, spend a little time for management of that person, I've got more time to sell. I can keep my pipeline full. And so I think it's a problem that solves itself, but you have to take that risk and you have to
Agree.
get the timing right. So
Agree.
yeah,
And so there's a great book called Who Not How, which
yeah,
which essentially encapsulates the spirit of what you just said, which is you do a certain thing better than anyone else. And as your growth affords it, you should be shedding the things that you're not passionate about and hiring people that's their passion. So you have
yeah.
better people doing things that you frankly don't want to do anyway.
Yeah, and I'm gonna throw one monkey wrench in our little world we just built though. Hold on to the hat that you actually enjoy though.
Yes, that's not a monkey wrench.
Yeah,
Yes.
because I've seen the guy that starts an IT business or something, and then he all of a sudden he doesn't touch code, he doesn't touch computers, doesn't touch anything. He's just running this thing, and he hates
And
his
he's
life. And I'm
miserable.
like, yeah, and I'm like, dude, listen, you're not going to bill yourself as like a $35 an hour engineer by any means, but just know like when you do touch something, if it's a $200 job and you're in there, the CEO of the company is in there monkey wrenching this thing. Know that project's going to cost you more than you're probably billing, so just be mindful of that.
Yeah,
But
and you're not giving the right picture of your company if the CEO is coming out to do hands-on coding, even if
but
you love software development.
but if you love it though, then make sure you put time in there. So
Some in there,
then,
yeah.
yeah, and we had
I will also add to that, though. We use the admin example. Um, that is a solo founder transitioning to entrepreneur problem, though. If
okay,
you're a business owner of a $1 million company, you're past hiring an admin. We're talking about hiring your first
yeah,
controller. We're talking about your IT manager. We're talking
right,
about your marketing person.
yeah. Yeah, so yeah, if you love being a controller and you're an entrepreneur, I don't know, that might be weird. So maybe there's certain
That
things,
would
but
be.
that passion of your business, like the reason why you found it, the soul, like the core of it, if there's a piece or a role that you want to play, that would be where I would tell the CEO, yeah, fine, you can be engineer for a day, but if you're an engineer for a day, we have a senior engineer you report to, and we have a head of, there's definitely structure, so you need to fit in that. So be prepared to be treated in that role that you enjoy. So there's the
Yes.
other side of that.
And one thing, and I'd like to move on from this since we're talking about hiring, and that's this. When you're that tiny company, the people that are attracted to that environment
Yeah.
are likely, and this isn't a universal truth, I'm just talking stereotypical probability. The people that like that kind of unstructured environment are likely not going to stay as you grow past a certain point because their psychological makeup is that pants on fire, crazy startup place. Some of them will grow with the company because they fall in love with the company. But generally speaking, your startup mentality folks are startup mentality folks. And when they go from 3 hats to a hyper defined job description, that's not what they like. So
And
don't beat them up when they leave. You've outgrown what they like.
so I think that's where if I can do this, let's go to challenge number 2 then,
Yeah.
because I think, the business that got you there is not the business that's going to get you there.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of ties into the second challenge that a lot of businesses face is lack of scalable systems. And that's what you need to be able to get to that growth stage is, you can pants by the fire, everybody's doing every job, like, woohoo, this is a party. But at some point you're going to be, wow, we've had success. How do we find what's repeatable and how do we ensure that we have a steady pipeline of clients? We can make sure that everybody's getting the fulfillment and what we promised them. How do we create that on a repeat cycle, right? That's where you need those systems to be built and structured and scalable. And those people that, originally were hey, everything's on fire, we're all running around. Now you're like, okay, dude, party time's over. Sit at your desk for 6 hours and bang out code. Like, that's all of a sudden a whole different paradigm shift for them. So, but you need those systems to scale. So
Yeah, and I 100% agree. And I think it sounds like there's a disconnect between us that isn't there. And let me explain. So, like, when people envision sales, they typically envision a sales funnel. So
right,
you've got your prospect and you work them through qualifications so they become a client or bounce out of the funnel. I
right,
think processes and systems could almost be envisioned the same way. So I join your company, I'm doing whatever I need to, whatever has to happen. But as
yeah,
the company grows, what I need to do becomes finer and finer, more and more refined, and frankly, done at a higher level of skill. And that's another part of it. So we've been using technology analogies, so I'll keep doing that. In an early stage company, who's the first hire? Probably somebody who can manage their WordPress site, can set up, Wi-Fi in the building, can fix printer jams, and can solve password problems. It's a jack of all trades IT support person.
right.
But as that company matures and they go from a WordPress site to a sophisticated custom site, as they go to a big network of systems, now that wide path is actually different career paths in that subset.
Yeah,
And
I
so
think,
that's what happens to a technology person is they have to pick which of those paths they want to be on. And some of them don't like that. Some of them like that little bit of everything. But
yeah.
they won't be able to exist in the more sophisticated system because they lack the depth now necessary in each of those disciplines.
Well, and I think you've seen this too as businesses grow, right? Like everyone starts off as generalists because they have these big
Yes.
buckets. Like you're saying, they have big areas that they cover. But then, yeah, you start honing in as you start figuring out your market differentiator or your unique selling point or your ICPs and what their desires are, or their pain points are, and then how you have to change your product or you have to modify. And so then, yeah, you go from generalist to specialist. So then, and some people they don't make the transition. I mean, it's a hard thing to go. Here's a park you can run around and play in. To all of a sudden, here's an amusement park where the rides are all these are the rides you have to stand in line and then you only get enjoyment for 3 minutes and then back in line. So
And I don't want to derail here because this is about operations specifically, but what you just described is dealt with through effective and consistent communication. So
right,
as the company grows and things change, we need as leaders to remember that the folks that work for us that are below us in the org chart, they don't have the insights they do. So
right,
absent knowledge, their human nature is going to fill those voids in with negativity. So if you share with them what you just described, hey, Joshua, we hired you to be the overall IT person. As we're growing and becoming more sophisticated, not only do we need more people because there's only one of you, but we need them to specialize in the areas. You were here
Right.
first. You've been knocking out of the park. I want you to tell me what piece you want because that's what you're going to get. And we're going to hire around you for the others. How do you feel about that? Notice I asked a question. I didn't tell you the way it's going to be. I asked you how
Yeah.
I feel about that because you might be, dude, I'm a generalist. I don't want to do one thing. And if that's the truth, we're going to confront you here. I'm going to say, Joshua, I understand that's the path we're going down. Understand that, and I respect your choice, that's at a point not going to work here anymore.
Well, and I think that takes a lot of foresight from leadership to understand, the direction that they're going, and then the capacity of their team. And
in all truthfulness, that's why the CXO world exists.
right.
So there's a reason why less than 15% of technology service firms ever break $10 million. And that's because, as Franklin and Twain famously said, the fish starts to rot from the head down, and an organization caps at its leader's growth point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So agree with you.
But I do like the idea that, and there was actually a sawmill that I did some work with, and they had a plan where anytime they changed anything or retooled, or they had divisions they had to get rid of, or whatever the business demands were, they actually retooled their human capital, or people. Sorry, like
I hate that term. So yes,
the operations guy, he's like a human capital, but no, the if you can retool those people, so that generalist, you need a manager, right? So like, is that person management capacity that they can oversee those things, so the generalists can still be general, overseeing the specialists that are getting things done. And because they've been there, they have industry knowledge, they have experience, and they understand the culture. Can you retool those people? And so I think, normally anyone that's worked with me as an operations person starting in the early stages, I would say people sometimes are in the way. And so if we can get a process, or we can hire the right person, we can switch those people out. But to preserve people, I think if we can retool them, I think I would be a big advocate for that, to preserve those people, um, and have an intentional growth plan. And I think that's where, lack of scalable systems, it's not just having the SOPs or having the org chart or whatever, but it's also having a plan of, hey, when we grow, when we get to these growth stages or points, what are we going to do with our existing assets, or just existing people, our existing customers, everything. How are they going to make that transition to that next stage that we're going into? I think
upskilling and cross training are super important. Now, for clarity, I work predominantly in the technology and cybersecurity space.
Right.
Having too many people is almost never the problem. It's almost always the inverse. So I appreciate that in some businesses that's not the case. But for me, the reason I've always hated human capital as a term is because I think it lends itself to the depersonalization of the folks that working with, and it enables leaders to make decisions that they wouldn't otherwise make. And I'm not for that enablement. So I've fired, without exaggerating, probably over 1,000 people in my career. So I appreciate that that's a necessity if they're no longer performing or they're not a part of the way the org works.
Yeah.
But I think that it's incumbent on us as business leaders in a culture and a society to make available to them, if they want it, the ability to stay with the org. If they don't want it, or they're not a fit for where we're going, that's the nature of things. Then they're not going to be in it anymore.
So I don't want to get us caught up on terminology too much, but the other side of human capital, that I feel like you're right. It can be cold and distant. I think the other side of it too is, if you have a building that you don't do any upgrades and you never touch it and you never do anything with it, that's not a great way to treat that asset. So I think employees as assets, I think you should be developing them, and I think you should be increasing
100%.
their capacity and ability. So I the operations part of me definitely is, can compartmentalize things. But I think the human component, definitely, that's one thing we can't forget. And I think that's a value that maybe I tend to forget, because everywhere I work, I try to instill those values, and I try to figure out where those values are. And a care for people is definitely a component of it. Um, but I see them as, I definitely see that as people have a set of skills. Great, can we skill them up or can we improve them? And so on that way, when we say capital, I think I guess maybe I see it on the positive side of it. So just to throw that
Yeah.
out there. I get what
100%.
you're
I
saying.
just, and I don't want to get to talk about this because
Yeah.
AI is talked to death now. But in a world where AI, if big if,
Yeah.
giant font, bolded, flashing orange lights, if AI develops in the way it's described, we're
Yeah.
going to be looking at a massive displacement of the white collar workforce.
Oh yeah.
So massive. So in a world where we don't have any type of UBI, and I personally am not a fan of that concept anyway, but the ability to cross train upskill is a societal necessity. Or
Yeah.
we go back to depression era times where we have roving bands of unemployed people. The difference is instead of them being blue collar, they're going to have very soft hands. So
Yeah. No, I think we need to have. I mean, I if you have people that work for you and you know the burden of leadership, I think you're responsible for these people. You know, their livelihood is attached to you, and so I think there's a certain amount of responsibility. So leveling these people up and getting them prepared for the future.
and,
You know,
and I appreciate I'm projecting my own leadership philosophy when I do this, but the Marine Corps taught me mission accomplishment, then troop welfare. And while mission accomplishment precedes troop welfare, it's not a big jump. We don't throw lives away unnecessarily. That's who
right?
how lieutenants get fragged. So we
Yeah,
don't do that. But as it relates to our conversation in specific, I think that for me, again, consistent, effective communication empowers me to make hard choices. Because in our example before, Joshua, our first IT guy, I shared with you where things were going. I shared with you how things were going to be. And now that we're there, you have the choice to make. It's not a
right,
surprise to you. I gave you
right,
the information I did. Now, do we always know everything in business? Not anyone I've ever been a part of. But where
right.
we do, we can. And developing a reputation for that when things do go sideways or something unexpected happens and we come to our team and share it. In my experience, we've made enough deposit into that relationship bank between us that
Yeah.
that team is more receptive to my surprise instruction than
Well,
if they hadn't been.
and I think one last thing, if I can, on this point is,
Please.
as you grow and your needs change, giving that person the ability to either stay with or transition out because maybe they've changed. You know, that
Yeah,
guy that you hired, that the 20-year-old that you hired right out of college, learned a couple of things, started their life, is on maybe a different journey, and so by constantly worrying about trying to keep that person and make a space for them and everything else, and you're sacrificing the business. Like if the business dies, everybody goes home.
100%.
So then if we do what we can to communicate, but there's a transition point where a decision needs to be made, maybe that person will succeed better off going back to another startup, taking that knowledge and then taking it to them, or they could start their own business, or you know what I'm saying. Like
I
there's
no, I completely agree, and that is in keeping with what I was talking about. I was part of a company. I was the president of a company that went from 2 to 2,500 people in less than 5 years. I can say with authority that many of those early stage people weren't there at the end, not because they're bad people, but because what the company became isn't what they signed up for, and they like the original form. So
right.
that there's no problem with that. The only point I was making was that when we're clear with people in our communication, they feel empowered in the decision making, things run more smoothly. If they do leave because the organization's no longer what they were, signed up for, and we are empathetic in the exit, we don't beat them up on the way out, then there's a lot more goodwill that makes that growth easier. If we get the reputation of being a churn factory or places that uses people up, it's super hard to grow.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and because then you're talking like that's a money problem, and then you're burning money like crazy. Yeah, and that's not a good place to be in.
Exactly. I'll share a scary statistic with you. In technology sales, it takes most technology salespeople between 12 and 14 months to be profitable when they
Oh
join an
wow.
organization. The
Yeah.
average tenure of a technology salesperson is 14 months.
Yeah.
So if you
Right.
can't build a team where people exceed the industry averages, becoming profitable is very difficult.
Yeah. No, I can definitely see that because you have to keep starting over and then yeah.
Yeah, and you never get them to a place where there's a return on investment. But listen, we could clearly talk about our second problem forever. So we talked about becoming a bottleneck from wearing too many hats. We talked
Yep.
about scalable systems and processes. Hit us with the third one.
All right, third one, and this is a comment for solopreneurs, startup, and founder led and founders managed businesses. Third one is difficulty managing work life balance. Uh,
I
I
don't even know what those words mean, so you go. I
yeah,
think we might have some differences here. I think this is going to
I
be
yeah,
interesting.
so I've watched like okay, I don't even want to do this whole thing, but like there's an influencer out there that's like, listen, if you're not a millionaire, it's because you're not working hard enough, and like you got to work like 14 hours a day, and you got
Yeah,
to
I
like,
know you're calling Gary Vee out, but you lack the courage to do it. I will
and
do it.
I'm just saying the next gen of that, muscle shirt and whole 9 yards, just crushing it, crushing it, crushing it. Yes, but I think if you want to get married, you want to have a partner, you want to have kids, you want to, go enjoy life, not when you retire, but enjoy life while you're, doing this. I think work life balance is important. Does it need to be a 40-hour work week? Listen, if you're getting a small business and you're expecting 40-hour work week, like
You've made a
that's
mistake. Yeah.
yeah, you need to like no offense, man, but like that's a destination point that you get to. That's not where you start off at. So I'll give you that. But I think remembering the reason why you're doing things and um, what's the purpose of the business? I mean, if you're living to work, uh, that's I can't buy into it. As much as I love business, as much as I love like yes, you can be a millionaire if you work hard, great, 1,000 hours. But I don't know. I just think there's a part of our soul and part of who we are that we need some rest, we need some downtime. And so, I had businesses while I had young kids. I missed parties. I missed different activities because at the time I thought the business absolutely needed it. Come to find out, I could have just reprioritized my schedule. I could have, if I would have just done things a little bit differently, I could have had that work life balance. So I think for me as a challenge, and kind of framing this is
Let let me
go
pause you
ahead.
because I don't want you to justify your position. You're not wrong.
No,
You're not wrong.
I like that you queued it up with like, oh, I think we got different things, and I'm
Oh,
like,
we
okay,
are. I'm throwing down in a minute. I promise you that. But before I do that,
yeah,
I want to
go
make
ahead.
it clear you're not wrong.
Okay,
Um,
so I think with that, um, the work life balance, I think, is where you work and you don't get to a place where you're burning out. Don't get to the place where that you're like you're ready to set the place on fire, like or that you're starting to make bad choices because you're overworked and you're. I think let's just I'm gonna say work life balance is come shy of the red line and know where the red line is. That's what I'm gonna say. That's work life balance.
there's a couple things I need to say here, and I'm going to try to keep it brief because it's a lot I
And
want to
those
cover.
of you guys listening, by the way, he's like leaning fully into the camera right now, and he's like almost like on top of the screen
Yeah,
here.
I'll tell you why. I don't think you're doing this. Before I even say it, I do not think you're doing this. But I think part of the lie that the solopreneur crowd tries to sell is the ability to achieve something exceptional without a matching amount of effort. And
Okay.
I
Yes.
do not think you're doing that. So let me
Okay.
start there.
Right.
Okay. So this isn't an accusation, but for clarity, the reason why I'm so passionate about this is I talk to founders groups and communities all the time. And many people have come to founding and startup Ville with this picture in their head that they're not going to be working hard and long. And
Oh,
my belief of startups is this. And I sound like a life coach when I say this, and I
yeah,
hate
go
it,
ahead.
but
Put your coaching
everything
on.
has a season, okay? And when you're starting up, there are going to be periods when and I can't stress this enough. I've worked with around 100, at least 85 companies. I can go through invoices and count. I've
Yeah.
founded 2 companies, been on the founding team for others, and
Yeah.
in none of them has there been periods of time where the founder didn't work multiple 7-day-a-week schedules to get through something?
Right.
Has there been times when I've literally fallen asleep at my desk, picked my head up, and worked until I fell asleep again? Is that an always thing? No. Gary V's, real quick, I promise I'll give the mic back.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Gary V's early stage stuff is burnout inducing garbage. But he's a great example of what I talked about because he lived that until he reached a point. And if you look at his new stuff, it's nothing like his old stuff because his business has matured to a point where he's not needed all the time. And he has matured to the point where he can see it.
So I think this is where there's definite alignment in the sense of when I say work life balance, like I don't mean in the immediacy of like you show up the first day, right, as an entrepreneur and you're like, I'm only gonna put in, you know, 6 hours because I want mental health and da, 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 da. Okay. Like good luck. I mean, if you know your ICP and you know your product and like you have it perfectly dialed in and you got the perfect system, then sure. But it's gonna take you a lot of time and energy to do this. And so, but there has to be a point though where there is some sort of like return on that investment,
Absolutely, yes.
right? Yeah. So like I think when I say work life balance, put it in the sum of everything that you're doing. I've had years where like things are going really good and I've worked a lot of hours and the extra money and everything was offset so we could take vacations, we could take time off. Like so there that was balance for me at that time. Now, I probably push about 35 hours a week. I'm not, 60 hours a week. Yes, I have a better handle on things. But I think if I want to get to my next stage, I gotta look at my schedule again and go, okay, I think I need to ramp up some hours. So to your point, yes, but I I guess this is coming through practice, seasoned enough to know where those trade offs are, so then I can understand where that is, and I think that's also part of the balance is knowing. Listen, if I put in an extra 10 hours, I'm supposed to. Here's my goals. Here's what I'm supposed to hit, and then when I go back to my spouse, it's like, hey, babe, I know I've been working all these extra hours, but here's the outcomes. Boom, 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 boom. She's like, great, I'm on board. Let's do it. Great, let's crush it.
Let,
As
let me
opposed to continually falling short and then not having any accountability for that.
Yeah, I think we might be talking about a couple of different things here, but I want to challenge you on something you said there for a minute too. First of all, your services are for a business of a certain size. You don't own or run a business of a certain size. You're effectively a solopreneur. So what you are accomplishing and achieving is different. I don't mean that as a slight. Please don't mistake that. But you don't have a team to feed. You have a family to feed. And you, because of the success you've had already, the book of business you created, your own experience, and I'm making this up for illustrative purposes, you
Oh,
need
that's
to
fine.
have, and again, make this up, 20 hours a week billable at X rate, and you can build a pipeline to do that, and you're good to go. But if you were looking to blow that up to a $10 million business, what would
Right.
you need to do? I don't think
Yeah.
the answer is 35 hours a week.
Oh, definitely not. And I think what's my version of success?
Yeah,
What does
for
that look
sure.
like?
And that's why I said you're not wrong from the very beginning. Um,
But
go.
and I do have one correction. So with the fractional work, so with the fractional work, my job is to step into businesses to help them. But,
Yes.
but I'm not gonna give up my business building, which is the fractional practice. So to your point, or to counter just a little bit, I am building a business. I am an owner of a business it's small in the grand scheme of
No,
the
no,
world.
yes. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. But I'm okay with that because I'm not gonna, Gary Vee and those guys, dude, those guys are crushing it. they're living their like version of life that they're loving. They've paid the sacrifices. I've seen that. I know it can be done, and so I'm sitting here where in my my viewpoint, and I'm okay with it. Like that's I think this is the other part. Is like when people complain, when I'm not making $1 million like these other guys, but I'm only working 30 hours a week. Okay, there's your problem, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to agree with you in part, but I'm going to point out something here that, that I don't think we're talking about. You are 100% a business person. That was no way in my intention to say differently.
All right, sounds
But
good.
your goal, I don't know what your number is. None of my business, not to be shared.
Sure.
But let's just say it's X. It's for our purposes, it's $500,000 a year, whatever the
Sure.
number is, and you know that you can do it as a solopreneur.
Right.
So your business is hitting that number. But if you're looking to build something more,
Right.
that structure is different. So the most
Yeah.
intense time I had was a 2 or 3 year window with Apicero, where our growth was ridiculous. VJ Venkat and I were the leadership team. We literally worked 7 days a week because several of our offices were in India. We
Yeah.
would have client meetings during the day and meetings with our architect teams at night. And by night,
Yeah.
I mean 2 a.m. There were times when the three of us would be staring at a Google sheet, deciding where we're going to steal a consultant to put there and this one there and trying to make that all work because we had more business than people, which is why recruiting was so important there. Do I want to do that all the time? No. We did it for a reason because we had a goal to hit. So there was a season there. At the same company, if something came up, I didn't miss a single one of my kids' shows, a single game, because I cut that time out of my window, but I wasn't afraid to log back in at 8 p.m. So I'm an insomniac. I don't sleep a lot anyway, so I get
No,
extra time. But
but I think you know, for me with the trade-offs and the operational kind of piece of it, you know, that's what it took to get that's what it took because that's the way the system was built to do what needs to be done at that time. So yeah, like don't get on the roller coaster, right? If you're looking the spiral of death roller coaster, don't sign up for the roller coaster, get on it and then complain like, oh my God, like why did
I, I think what you just hit is the most important part of our conversation in this area, and that's this. If you're trying to build a solopreneur career at this income level, then look at what you need to do that. If you bill, and I'm making numbers up, if you bill $150 an hour, how many billable hours do you need? How many clients do you need to close that will bill for that amount of time at that rate to get you this number? When you know what that is, evaluate what that looks like and ask yourself if that creates the life you're looking for. Now,
right,
if your goal is to build a company you can sell for $250 million in 5 years,
yeah,
what do you need to do that? And then
right,
ask yourself, is the life I need to live during that 5 year window something I would be happy and blessed to live to get that outcome? If the answer is no, then don't do it. But the
right,
reason why work life balance is such a hot button for me is because so many founders have been told the story on LinkedIn by
yeah,
people who I won't name, like Justin Walsh, that they can become millionaires as solopreneurs working 5 hours a week. When the reality is that dude's not a solopreneur. He works with like 20 different consultants who in
right.
any other context would be called a 20-person team, you know?
Well, and I think to kind of play one more on this, like look at the Spartans, right? Their life, they had work life balance. They happen to be working like
Yeah.
20 hours a week and living on nothing and not having possessions and no relationships and everything else. So, um, yeah. So I think when we say difficulty maintaining work life balance, I think what I'm imagining or with that is kind of framing this a little bit better is that what is your definition of success, what does it take to
Yes.
get there, and then are you okay with the paradigm that you need to get to that place. And every time there's a growth stage, yeah, that's where this is. I'm going to give you, as a sales guy, I'm going to give you the free chaos card here. When you talk about growth and you talk about innovation and taking that next step, you don't want operations trying to control everything as you're trying new products, new sales. Like you kind of almost want to let the dog off the chain and let it just kind of run the grass and run the field and kind of know where everything is. And so that's where you're not going to have that, I structured everything, I've got it running and operating here. To get to that next stage, you're going to have to open things up and kind of let that be a mess. But my caution to that is make sure that you know at what point it's a fish or cut bait scenario, because
100%.
if you're on the water 20 hours a week, you're not catching fish. Like, dude, you got to try another profession, or you got to do something else with your time.
And I think that's a little bit of a thing. But Joshua, I want to tie what you just said, because I agree with everything you said, back to what we're talking about in our Joshua, the first IT guy story. By being clear in our communications to ourselves about what we're trying to achieve, our timeline to get there, and the amount of time we're willing to put into that, we can make those decisions. But one last thing, and I'd like to wrap up, and that's this. And I think you highlighted it in a way in mentioning Gary Vee. When you're getting advice,
I didn't say Gary Vee, by the way.
When you describe the person who very, very clearly was not Gary Vee. When you mentioned him, I think it's important when you're getting advice, or when you're looking at, again, a person like hypothetically Gary Vee, when you're looking at that you look at what their life looks like, what stage they're in their career, and how much of that marries up. I had a very good conversation with a friend of mine, Trenton Hughes, who runs an incredible startup group called Tribe. And he talked about how in his first startup, he worked crazy time, and he wonders now if he needed to. And I was like, dude, I think that you needed to for where you were, but where you are now isn't the same place that you were. And you likely don't have to do that now. But conversely, you likely wouldn't be where you are if you didn't do what you did.
Right. Well, I think there's the other, maybe one final takeaway on this is, you can't undo the past, right? Yes. So shoulda, woulda, couldas. Hey, man, that's what led you to where you are now. So take where you are now, learn from that, and then make your plans for what you're going to do forward. Because, some experiences you do have to go through yourself, but you can't regret those. I think you just have to deal with where you are now and move forward. So.
Yep. Everything creates where we're all time travelers, but unfortunately our time machines only move forward 1 second at a time. So listen, Joshua, let's wrap up here. This has been great. Clearly you have to be on again. I want to pick a topic we don't agree on, and we'll argue for 45 minutes.
Oh my God. That'll be fun.
Let me ask you this, Joshua. If folks want to learn more about you and about your business, how can they reach you?
So one, you can go to my website, thinkadaptbuild.com.
Love that name.
Two, you can head over to LinkedIn. I'm super easy to find. So I don't know, type my name in there, Joshua, Monge. It is Monge. So you can find me there. And I guess maybe this podcast there, you can find me. I'll be back. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see.
I think you will be. Listen, it's been great having you on. All of those locations, folks, longtime listeners, you know this, will be in the show notes. So whether it's YouTube or Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever, click on the show notes. Those links will be there, and you can reach out to Joshua directly. I strongly recommend you do.
And I will give them free 30 minutes. I will map a process. I will help them solve a problem. I will give free value to any of your listeners that if they book through here.
Awesome. And I will add to his commitment that you can just argue for 30 minutes. That's fine. So, Joshua, I loved having you on the show. Thank you very much. For everybody out there in the audience, continue to be awesome, build great things, and I look forward to talking to you next week again.